When Jonghyun sang and the performance was a bit off, Hyeorang took the initiative to beat the drums so that her singing would fit into the performance. Although the audience liked it, director Kang did not. She was very angry with Jonghyun and decided that Jonghyun should not go on stage again. But Jonghyun felt that she did nothing wrong and the audience cheered for her. And that's what the director meant, that the audience only focus on her, not on the performance. Even though Jonghyun was not the main player, but just an extra. Hyeorang thought Ok-yeong would be disappointed with Jonghyun's performance. But it turned out not to be, because Ok-yeong knew that Jonghyun always acted recklessly. Luckily Hyeorang still saved her. But Hyeorang thought her ability tonight could destroy her, so stop spoiling her. And Ok-yeong thought she was still young, so she could absorb everything and continue to grow.
그럼 진짜 재미없는데.
Jonghyun sat alone, she seemed to regret her actions. Then Jiren came and asked her to go home, because everyone had left. Outside, there were some fans waiting for her. They really liked Jonghyun's performance. But it seems like Jonghyun is not happy and Jiren knows her friend's feelings. Jonghyun feels that the director's words are true, that the audience did not watch their performance tonight. They only saw her going crazy on stage. If it weren't for Hyeorang, the whole performance would have been ruined. Youngseo visits her mother and sister and her mother welcomes her warmly. Youngseo is a bit surprised because her mother suddenly acts differently. Her mother really enjoyed the Gakjuk performance and is also curious about Jonghyun. It turns out that when she heard her voice, her mother knew that she was Choi Gong-sun's daughter. Her mother feels that Jonghyun was blessed by the heavens, so the starting point is clearly different. Some people never succeed even after giving their all, but some people are born with it. So, her mother asks Youngseo to reach the peak before her and break Jonghyun's spirit. Jiren approaches Jonghyun. She thinks Jonghyun is sad because she can't perform anymore. But it turns out she is crying because of the smoke from the fire. Seeing that Jiren is relieved, Jonghyun feels that she can't stay silent, because she knows her mistake and she must focus not to repeat the mistake. Actually, she practiced by herself lately. She showed Jiren that she analyzed all the roles in the play. That's why she chose the role of a soldier. It was to observe all the roles in the play, but she went too far. But Jiren thought it was a waste because she was banned from appearing in this show. Jonghyun felt it was not important because if she was given the chance to appear again, she had to prepare. Hearing that Jiren would try to help Jonghyun. Then Jonghyun asked Jiren to be Gomijeol and she became Darling. They started, but Jonghyun found it difficult to play Darling. Then she asked Jiren to switch roles. Jonghyun became Gomijeol and Jiren became Darling. They started again, and when Jonghyun acted, her eyes were very sharp looking at Jiren. And that made Jiren feel nervous. When Jonghyun held her and pulled her, Jiren was speechless. That's when Jonghyun felt she could play Gomijeol, but not Darling. When in front of room, suddenly Youngseo comes out of the room and makes Jonghyun shocked. It turns out that Jonghyun's mother's vinyl record was destroyed by Youngseo. Jonghyun chases her and sees her singing while crying. When Jonghyun comes in, Youngseo asks her to teach her to sing like her. Because Jonghyun is a genius and knows how to sing well without having to practice. Is that something that only geniuses like Jonghyun and her mother can get? Does Youngseo look pitiful in Jonghyun's eyes? Jonghyun is curious about how she knows Choi Gong-sun is her mother. Youngseo explained that she knew from her mother, that her mother immediately recognized Jonghyun's voice. But Jonghyun was afraid that she would always live in her mother's shadow. Afraid that every time she sang, she would only remind them of her mother. And if she didn't want to stop, Even though she was afraid of her mother's shadow, she could only fight in her own way. So she told Yang Xiu to keep fighting in her own way. Everything she had achieved with sweat, blood and tears was hers. And Yang Xiu could only be silent and cry hearing Zhongnian's words. When Juran practiced with Yang Xiu, she couldn't concentrate, because she remembered when Zhongnian looked at her. Seeing Juran acting strangely, Yang Xiu lost concentration. Doing who saw them became angry, because they couldn't focus. Then Yang Xiu asked who Juran was imagining in. She knew that Juran wasn't looking at Yang Xiu, but imagining someone else. Juran couldn't answer and Yang Xiu told her to just focus on her. When Zhongnian was practicing alone, Ogyang suddenly approached her. She saw Zhongnian was getting into Darling character, but Zhongnian had difficulty and always mispronounced Darling lines. Then she remembered that Ogyang used to play the antagonist and she asked Ogyang to practice with her. She became the Darling and Ogyang became the Gomijiao. Ogyang felt that Zhongnian was fawning over her and then she agreed. They started and Ogyang pulled and hugged Zhongnian from behind. Ogyang acted very well, but Zhongnian still had difficulty. Zhongnian felt that she couldn't act that gently, while according to her, the Darling was someone who was brave. Then Ogyang asked her to combine her interpretation and the existing interpretation. Try to signal with her eyes and subtle movements. And most importantly, think far ahead. Don't get too caught up in your own character, but think about your role in the whole narrative.
다시 한번 해볼까?
Before the show, they did rehearsal again. They thought the director must be worried that someone would go crazy like Zhongnian. Hearing that, Juran just kept quiet. It turned out that the director did that because someone had entered the property room earlier, so she just wanted to be careful. At that time, Zhongnian came to see her friends from the audience seats. Seeing Juran, Zhongnian thought her voice was smoother than before. And at that time, Doing saw Mr. Ko there. Then when Yang Xiu was acting with Juran, suddenly the stage lights fell and Juran pushed Yang Xiu so that she wouldn't be hit by the lights. At that time Juran felt pain in her legs and she had difficulty walking. Zhongnian was very worried and they were confused why the lights fell. The director didn't know that, then she asked Doing to take Juran to the hospital. And the director asked the reserve actor to replace Juran. That's when Juran saw Zhongnian. She told Zhongnian to play the role of the Darling. But Zhongnian didn't want to because she would accompany her to the hospital. And the director could find another substitute actor. Juran thought there was only Zhongnian and she only wanted the person to replace her to be Zhongnian. But Zhongnian was afraid of messing up the show again like the other day. Juran felt that only Zhongnian was ready because she often practiced like her. Zhongnian had memorized the entire script and the show. Then Zhongnian told the director that she would replace Juran. Because she had memorized all the dialogues, lyrics and dances. Director Kong gave her a chance, but if she messes up again then she will leave the group. That her role is to fuel Yang Xiu's acting. Finally, the show started and when Ogyang acted with Zhongnian. They seemed to have very deep chemistry and made the audience's hearts beat. And when Yang Xiu acted with Zhongnian, they also got into their roles. Juran also watched their acting from behind the audience. When Yang Xiu saw Zhongnian's sharp gaze, she became nervous. She forgot her lines and held Zhongnian's hand. Then Zhongnian acted quickly, by acting again and made Yang Xiu remember her lines again and they were able to finish the show well. Director Kong was satisfied with Yang Xiu and Zhongnian's performance. She then decided Zhongnian to be an official trainee, not a reserve anymore.
뭐래?
According to Doing, the person who caused the stage lights to fall was Mr. Ko. Because it's so strange that he's present at the dress rehearsal today, even though he never came to watch the show. She don't know why he went this far to ruin the show. And Hyeong came, then they went to the director's office. It turned out that Mr. Ko had taken the ledger and also took all the money in the safe. Director Kong forbade Hyeong when she was going to call the police. Because if the news spread, everyone would be happy, because Miran would fall. And it would also affect the morale of their group. Hyeong apologized, because she was the one who introduced Mr. Ko to Director Kong. The director didn't blame Hyeong, because she didn't know that. But it turned out that Hyeong worked with Mr. Ko to bring down Miran. And Mr. Ko also bribed journalists to prevent articles about Ok-young. Hyeong thought, the audience doesn't need Ok-young's past, because she has to be a prince forever.
옥경이는
At home, Ok-young read storybooks to Hyeong's niece. And when Hyeong came home, she decided to leave the house. Hyeong didn't like it because Ok-young would meet his friends. Because every time Ok-young came back, she always felt bored with everything. Ok-young felt bored with Gakjuk because of Hyeong, not her friends. The more Hyeong wants to keep Jonghyun, Youngseo and Jiren out of the group, the more she kicks Ok-young out too. Ok-young doesn't tell the director what Hyeong did because she respects Hyeong. But Hyeong feels like they are her competitors and she has to fight them. She never lets them replace her and Ok-young. But Ok-young thinks that's the reason their group is stagnant, because they are stuck in one place. They never get new audiences and that makes Ok-young bored and fed up. Miran's group travels to Busan to do a show tour. When they arrive, fans immediately crowd Ok-young and give her flowers. The director thanks her for inviting the group and she also reviews her play script. It turns out they will be holding a theater performance merger between the groups. Jonghyun approaches Jiren, who is sitting alone. She can't sleep because she misses her hometown. Jonghyun misses her family and feels guilty every time she thinks about them. But even if she could turn back time, she would make the same choice. And Jiren is like that too, they are both the same reckless. Suddenly, Jonghyun touched Jiren's cold hand. She became worried if Jiren had a cold. She then warmed Jiren's hand and saw stars together. When they wanted to go back to the room, they saw Youngseo, who was muttering Jonghyun, and then they surprised Youngseo. Jiren seemed to know that Youngseo wanted to talk to Jonghyun, then she left first. It turned out that Youngseo gave Jonghyun her mother's vinyl record that she had damaged while saying sorry. Hearing Youngseo's apology, Jonghyun teased her by rushing to not hear her apology. Director Kong told the trainees that every year they hold a joint performance between theaters. And this year, there will be more scenes of the younger version of the main character. The audition will be held in a month, and if they pass the audition then they will become star candidates for the female and male leads, who can continue Moon Ok-young and Seo Hyeong. And the condition is, the female and male leads must audition as a couple. Director Kong wants to see the successes of Ok-young and Hyeong came from their Gakgukdan Miran. It is very important to be the successor of Ok-young, the Prince of Miran.